Kia ora, womanjeka, and a very warm welcome to everybody here today. Before we get started, I would like to say that we acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, air, waterways, and community. We thank them for their custodianship and care of this land and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It is our privilege to have this talk on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Yaluk Ut Willimbun Wurrung land today. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which anyone watching the recording of this event today. So, food, fashion and farming. What can fashion learn from the food and farming industries? This talk is produced by Etu and Ula, and my name is Rachel Kelly, and I am the founder of Ula and your moderator for today's talk. Etu is the Māori word meaning to stand. Our mission is to take a stand for the environment by raising awareness of the impact fashion and textiles has on the environment. To quote from Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World, the relationships between systems are just as important as the relationships within them. There is much to learn from how other systems operate, and today we'll be exploring by hearing from the experts across food, fashion and farming systems. Our aim today is not to provide all the answers. Instead, it's to provide insight, perspective, and resources for you to take away and share on your journey of exploration. So at the end of today's talk, we've got a number of QR codes dotted around the room, and all of the panellists here today have been asked to share their resources that have really helped shape their thinking in their careers. So the QR code will link you to those resources to dive deeper. So, a little bit of audience participation because, we all like a bit of that. Just wanted to get a little bit of an indication of, what experience and insights we have in the crowd. So I'd just really like to get a quick hands up of those that work in the fashion industry. Okay, wonderful. Hands up if you work in the farming or agricultural space. Awesome. And lastly, hands up if you work in the food industry. Okay, wonderful. And for anyone that, didn't raise your hand then, welcome. It's wonderful to have you all here. So now to introduce our expert panellists. So next to me, we've got Dr. Kate Sala. Kate is an educator, lecturer and researcher. Kate holds a PhD at RMIT University, which seeks to advance the dialogue around critical fashion. Now this word, you're going to have pedagogy. Thanks, Kate. Through exploring best practice methods for communicating about sustainability. Kate has particular interest in understanding how transformative communication strategies foster a greater sense of ownership and accountability amongst emerging designers. At the far end, we've got Karen Christopherson, who is a gardener, a writer, and environmental consultant. After a pivotal experience at Denmark's first rooftop farm, Ostergro, Kieran returned home and enrolled in a Master of Urban Horticulture at the University of Melbourne. His research explores the learning journey of Victoria's first-generation farmers, a critically under-researched cohort who currently are reimagining the future of Australian farming. Today, Kieran will be sharing his recent experiences working across culinary farms across Victoria. Together, Kate and Kieran have founded Ecofloria, a neighbourhood farm in Landsfield where they host workshops and grow a community garden. You'll see the flowers, the kale harvest, and the soil are all very generous gifts bought from Kate and Kieran here today, and are gifts to the audience to take home afterwards. Next up, we've got Courtney Holm, who is the founder of ABCH, a circular fashion label on a mission to transform the way we buy, wear and discard clothing. Founded in 2017, the label set out to reject the seasonal fashion calendar, separate men's and women's collections, and challenge the retail model, as well as challenge the traditional pricing structures and the secretive businesses practices often associated with the industry, to address fashion's environmental and social issues head-on and pioneer a circular fashion future. Courtney's design practice focuses on eliminating material and energy waste throughout the garment's entire life cycle of birth, life, afterlife, while evolving a refined and durable aesthetic. And finally, we have Tara Wingate. After graduating with a BA in Honours in Fashion Design from the University of Brighton, Tara worked for luxury companies across the globe and has spent the last 6 years working for local labels made in Australia. Currently, the production manager at The Social Studio, a not-for-profit enterprise dedicated to improving the lives of refugee youth who have experienced barriers to accessing education and securing meaningful employment. Tara is interested in the power of community and believes businesses should be doing more to actively share sustainable practice knowledge. So we've got a very exciting panel. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get into the first round of questions. We're just going to dive straight into it. Questions around current state of play. So, Karen, how has your industry changed in the last 5 years, and what do you predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
It feels kind of strange to be considered an expert panellist, given that I only graduated from my master's last year. And for me, working in agriculture is also a new experience. For the first 15 years of my professional career, I worked in leadership development, decided below that, didn't want to work in the corporate sector, and so I went and learnt the science of plants. And in the research that I've conducted, I guess the last 5 years have seen development in terms of where agriculture is performed in this state particularly, and also who does it. So traditionally, if you look back to modern settlement, Australia is one of the most urbanised countries in the world, huge city populations, and largely it was the responsibility of the rural population to feed the city. And in the last 5 to 10 years, following trends from the Northern Hemisphere, we've started to see that mentality invert itself. So we're now seeing, despite the fact that we've had sort of peri-urban market gardens in Melbourne for many years, that land gets snatched up by development, and increasingly we're seeing sort of decentralised approaches to producing food for urban populations. On top of that, referring to the question of who's doing it, I think everyone would probably be familiar with an often quoted stat that Australia has an issue with an ageing farmer population. It's often estimated that it's about 65 years of age, our average farmer age. And increasingly we're seeing people like me from completely I grew up in Frankston, like I've got no business growing food for anyone. We're seeing people from non-agricultural backgrounds enter the food system, and increasingly those people are getting younger and younger. So I think those two issues are really exciting in the farming space.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. What a journey from Franger, hey? Yep. All right. Courtney, really interested to hear how your perspective on how the fashion and textile industry has changed, with a particular lens on materials innovation and technology. So how's it changed in the last 5 years, and where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, by the way. It's lovely to be here in a real live event. That's kind of hasn't happened for a while, so that's great. Yeah, look, I think what I've noticed happening over the last 5 years, and even before that, is that we've really, as an industry, fashion industry, started to rely a lot more on synthetics. And so the synthetic fiber market is greatly overpowering any natural fiber market now. And that's a really problematic thing, especially for the oceans with microplastics, but also just a kind of shift to cheaper materials and to relying on non-renewable resources. So I think that's been something that's just kind of getting more and more prevalent. And then kind of looking to the future, I think people are generally starting to, like the average consumer is starting to understand a little bit more about what is a sustainable fiber and what isn't. And I think that's really fantastic. A few years ago, someone might have thought that a generic bamboo was sustainable, whereas these days people are much more cottoned on to the fact, excuse the pun, but cottoned on to the fact that bamboo is viscose 95% of the time, and viscose has been uncovered to be a very chemical-intensive industry. So it's just interesting little things like that where we're starting to see, okay, what is the kind of true colors of these different fibers. But I think in the future we're going to be looking a lot more at recycled fibers. Right now there's, recycled PET is like the hottest thing ever, but I think we're going to actually start to see more recycled cellulose-based fibers, and also man-made cellulose fibers that come from waste rather than coming from trees. So I think that there's some exciting places in the future that we are heading.
Yes, wonderful. And Tara, so I'm asking you the same question, however, with the lens on your background, which is production, supply chains, and in terms of where has it been in the last 5 years, and what's your vision for the future?
Thank you for having me, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here. So in the past 5 years, you've really seen momentum behind the movement of holding brands accountable for sustainability and ethics within the supply chain and for production. I guess this movement really started after 2013 and the Rana Plaza disaster, which is a very unfortunate event to occur to kind of create change. But you see, you've had the fashion revolution launching this campaign for Who Made Your Clothes, which has been adopted by many brands and been very successful. They also do an annual report called the Fashion Transparency Index, which kind of gives a measure of transparency of brands both in high street and in luxury as well. So whilst you've got a lot of positive change happening and a lot of brands kind of rising to the challenge and really adopting more sustainable practices within their supply chains and production, we also have the problem of fast fashion just charging forward. And we've seen that in the past 5 years. So last year there was actually a dip in industry profits because of COVID-19. So there was 12% dip, but then we also saw huge brands like ASOS quadrupling their profits because of sales of casual wear online. So we really need to make sure that we put those pressures and demands on those really big corporations. And then where it unfolds in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't know. It could be that we kind of feel like we're playing catch up constantly with these huge brands who are just creating more and more for consumption. And the positive impact only offsets their negative impact on the environment. Or perhaps we see a bit of a tip in the balance and some more positive change and a real mass mainstream adoption of sustainability.
Thanks, Tara.
Right, can I quickly add?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just on the back of that, I think what's really interesting is what you said is through COVID we saw huge luxury houses make a pivot and drastically do so in order to avoid losing a lot of money. And what was so interesting about that analysis is watching large corporations pivot radically when money was on the line to technology-based interfaces, so looking at things like digitising their collections, looking at virtual runways, trying to figure out how to keep that clientele in, goes to show that when money is on the line, that pivot is that it's possible, it's able to be made. So again, I reiterate, it's a really great point you make about increasing pressure and make sure it maintains beyond the global crisis.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for that addition, Kate. So I've got a slightly different question for you because you are in a very interesting space where you, I guess, straddle both, fashion and food and farming. So I'm really interested to know, given your interest using education as to transform perspectives, how can we help consumers connect the dots and create a relationship between the clothes that they buy and how they live? Because I think that we have lost that connection with clothing. When we think about it, a lot of people know that their food comes from the ground. However, we're so disconnected from the origin story when it comes to fashion and textiles. A lot of people wouldn't associate their cotton T-shirt being an agriculture product, but it's come from the earth. How would you reply to that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and thanks, Rach, for today, and Ulla. I think it's a really interesting point that you actually finish on there, which is we're disassociated from the origin story, and a lot of the time with food, it's something that is championed from the outset. And I think what's really interesting is that the food industry is far more regulated in that respect than the fashion industry. So grown in, product of, and made in, the labelling is different. The rules around the labelling for food in specific relation to grown in, product of, and made in are different to what fashion has to abide by. And I think that it's that emphasis on drawing that connection between those things, because it's so heavily regulated, is something that we miss out on, unfortunately, within the fashion industry, is the we. But I think we've got really fantastic primary examples here on the panel, both with the Social Studio and with ABCH. Courtney actually champions that connection of the dots through visual media, through her voice, through using social media. I hope you're not embarrassed that I'm just... But I think that for a lot of the time in the classroom, I actually lean on and work with byproduct as Courtney, because she uses really highly accessible tools like social media, like Instagram, to actually connect with her consumers, to tell stories about various different ways that waste can be controlled through mechanisms of waste and recycling protocols. You went through the whole biodegradable and recycling and what the definitions, what all those different things mean. And a lot of my students referred to that in class, to be able to have her as an educator within the practicing space, I think is an incredible tool for us as people who sit within tertiary education institution to rely upon and partner with as well. So I think that in response to your question, the way that we connect the dots is, if we're speaking on behalf of fashion businesses, we use visual media to help people understand and associate with the story we're trying to tell. We don't rely purely on our words, because words can get complex. We can use terminology that sometimes takes a little bit of time for people to even have to Google or research or look in the dictionary to figure out what maybe even circular economy means. And I think sometimes being able to associate image with explanation is a really easy way to go, okay, that's actually going to relate to me. I love flowers, or I love seeing, at one stage Courtney had an installation in her store where she had a lot of the grasses that she was referring to a certain plant matter for the product that it had made, like a garment in the store, and it was just that direct visual association. So I think, experimenting with the way that we indulge in experience, and we encourage our consumers to have their own experiences with our product.
Beautiful. Well, you've all painted a very, desirable picture of the future. I'm really, hope the industry can heed to that. So we're going to move in now to talking a little bit about land management. So, as some of you might be aware, the quality of our soil is eroding. Soil degradation is an issue of our time, and regenerative farming, while not new and often draws on agricultural practices used by Indigenous communities before and during colonialism, its resurgence is disrupting the current agricultural system and making positive and lasting change. So, Kieran, to swing to you, could you tell us a little bit about what regenerative agriculture is, as well as the opportunities and how it provides alternatives to the current system, and how you're using it at Ecofloria? So there's a few there.
A few questions. So let's see how many times we all trip over the term regenerative agriculture in this talk as well. So it's an umbrella term that was sort of applied to, as you said, Rach, a range of different agricultural paradigms, largely through the work of a text called Call of the Reed Warbler, which was written by Charles Massey. It was an adaptation of his PhD thesis in which he collated interviews with 80 practitioners around Australia, farmers, to explore their process of transitioning from conventional production methods to any sort of form of regenerative ag. So it was born out of this need, particularly in America. The situation's much more dire. Research over there suggests that there could be as little as 50 or 60 harvests left in that soil. And Australia, we're not in the sort of same crisis mode, although we do have quite fragile soils naturally. Australia is a very ancient continent that was managed in particular ways by Aboriginal groups for tens of thousands of years, and then following modern settlement has been completely obliterated by these practices that were applied to very rich, very deep European soils. So simply, regenerative ag is about practicing food production in a way that increases and improves the ecological functioning of a landscape. The alternative, I guess you might say, to conventional production methodologies is that regenerative practices, they integrate or internalise outcomes that are largely externalised by our dominant conventional industrial paradigm. So that's things like soil structure, fertility, water holding capacity, nutrient density in the food, the health and sustainability of the farm, the physical health and well-being of the farmer and the community and the food that it produces. So that's sort of the change in mindset, is that how do we grow food in a way that augments the functioning of the landscape, that gives back more than the process of growing that product takes. And I guess in my industry, which is, smaller, sort of 2 to 5 acre intensive mixed vegetable context, that's largely about minimising mechanisation, so using a lot of hand tools, which sounds great and very romantic, but it's absolutely exhausting when you've got a few hundred metres of beds to prep in a day. So it's minimising soil disturbance. It's about using cover cropping, so sowing a particular variety of plant species when those beds aren't in production in order to keep roots in the soil, to minimise erosion, to continue processes of photosynthesis which enable soil biology to sort of live or overwinter in what would otherwise be sort of bare soil that they'd get killed in frost by, at least up in Lionville where I work. I think, those practices are great, and there is a real romanticism to the way that we produce food using those methods, but the issue for us isn't the sort of small artisan mixed veg operations. And I would really, if you're interested in learning more about it, recommend reading Call of the Reed Warbler. Charles Massey has done talks everywhere, TED and writers' festivals and all of these things, and some of the most amazing projects that he discusses are these huge cattle stations up north in the NT. And I'm talking like thousands of hectares, billions of dollars of investment from huge bodies that are looking to put in the infrastructure to be able to create a situation whereby the limited rainfall that does occur in those areas is able to be trapped in the soil, to be able to be protected, and then to be able to be funneled through the rest of the farm so that it can serve its purpose and you can get the most out of that resource. How we use that at home with Ecofloria and in my work with Annie Smithers at De Fermier, it's about keeping the resources on the farm, so making composts. It's about trying to reuse the materials that we bring on, minimise single-use plastic, and treat the soil, as you've said, Rach, as a resource to be protected and not something that you can sort of ship in year after year. It's a long-term project of management.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that sort of localised aspect. I think place-based solutions in this space are, the shift we need to see. So, Courtney, if we were to apply similar logic then in terms of how regen ag is having this transformation in the food and farming space, then, it seems to me that if fashion and textiles was to shift gear, we could actually be seeing clothing that, doesn't cost the earth. And so I'm interested to know, how is the fashion and textile industry responding to the soil crisis, and what more needs to be done? Also, if there are, barriers, I'm interested to hear those from you as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Kieran, it was really great hearing the proper definitions, especially in the food space, because I often read about regenerative ag when it comes to like cotton growing, and it's really interesting just to hear the other perspective of it. But like with growing any sort of crop, like those same principles can be applied. So cotton, for example, is a very shallow crop, and therefore it doesn't go deep into the soil and provide a lot of nutrients. It's very drying, and the soil is kind of gross after the cotton is harvested. And so one of the kind of techniques that a lot of organic farmers use is to plant rotational crops that are very nutrient rich and very good for the soil, that have deep roots, legumes, wheat, alfalfa, chickpeas, stuff like that. And so it's similar principles, and instead of planting like, just a massive monocrop of cotton, planting like alternating rows of different nourishing plants as well. Also having cover crops and things that encourage biodiversity. It's just kind of starting to roll out in the fashion space as something of interest to like even bigger companies. Patagonia has been kind of talking about this stuff for a long time as well. But because the industry is so heavily synthetic, 65% of the market share of fibers is synthetics. We're only looking at like a 20% industry of cotton, maybe 5% of wool. But there's definitely opportunities, and we can improve I think we can improve the share of the natural fibers that we use by looking at permaculture farming and what we've been talking about today. There's a wool farm that we've been in conversation with over the last year that's a permaculture farm, and they have, so apparently when they got this farm in the 1920s, it was like completely like windswept, bare lands, trampled by, it had sheep farmed there for a time, and it was just kind of depleted, and they've spent 3 generations of their family have spent time like bringing back looking at getting more trees, and they've got a stream, and they've got like the animals kind of free roaming, and lots of like focus on native vegetation. And I think that's what we want to start seeing happening. But the problem is, if you go further upstream, is that when it comes to fiber, people want it to be consistent. They want the same volume every time. They want the same price every time. But when you're looking at some of these alternative regenerative methods, it's not always going to be like that. We have to change our expectation on what quantities and volumes we're going through with natural fibers, because it is a natural agricultural product. So it may not be, that we can produce the amount that we're producing currently. And so a big part of what we talk about at ABCH is volume, and actually looking at, do we need to be making as an industry the amount that we are producing? No, we don't. That's the answer. But getting everybody on board in that conversation, because it gets kind of skimmed over, because people just want to talk about the circular economy is going to change everything and solve all of our problems. But it's like kind of been hijacked by fast fashion. And we need to be talking about volume. That's really, if we go to the heart of it, we need to talk about volume. So anyway, I could get ranty.
No, let's do it. That's great. I'm really glad you brought up the topic of, yields changing. I mean, the seasons change. Yeah. And I think so often seasonality and obviously the changing seasons, they just get left out of the equation, doesn't it? But obviously...
And if you have crops that are relying on rainwater, and you have a year where there's not a lot of rain, that's going to impact your crop and your yield. Yeah. And so are we just going to keep drawing more water, or are we going to use what we have? It's a different mentality. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, we tend to grow cotton in countries that are, have little rainfall. So, what is... what could the solutions be in that space? So to close off our land management chapter, Kate, I mean, regenerative agriculture sounds really good, and it sounds really great across both systems, So what is the role of education in connecting the consumers and the future practitioners?
Yeah, great question. And just going to actually piggyback off your last comment. Why do we need the volume that we need? Controversially, why do we all have to be fashion designers? I think the industry is evolving, and the jobs and positions that are becoming available for emerging designers, students, whatever you like to label the people coming out of universities, they're also shifting too. And I think the role and the responsibility of the educator, and also the educator from a commercial sense being the business owner, is to let people know that there are other positions available. There are different research opportunities. There are ways in which we can engage through technology. There are ways that we can engage through research, various different practices and job titles that are evolving literally every day, that don't necessarily mean that we all have to be fashion designers and we all have to create and produce garments. And I think that that's a really, really exciting space to be in, is to have that conversation with students and just say, look, this industry is on the cusp of change, is actually experiencing a paradigm shift, and we have the ability to redefine the roles that we want to take within this industry. So what do you want to do? And how can we help you get there? So I think that from my perspective, the role of education within a tertiary education realm is to help people understand that they can use their passion, drive and force and curiosity to really create different roles and to shift the focus in the industry, but also to identify what their values are. So I know that we've spoken a lot about this, but to understand that when you are pursuing a career, it's not just about, I really liked this growing up, or I really want to do this for X, Y, and Z. It's understanding who you are as a person and being able to connect your own personal values, not those ones that have just been thrown on you by your family, your friends, your culture, whatever, but understanding who you intrinsically are. What are you passionate about? What do you want to impart on, the world, your friends and family? What do you want to let them know? And then try and connect that with, a job, a position, even a path, or a series of questions that you can ask your tutor about your own future. So that values-driven, I think, association is really important in education and helping people understand that.
Beautiful, Kate. Gosh, that makes me feel so happy that the students have a lecturer like yourself who is asking them about what their values are and asking them some of those hard questions, because I think we don't talk about values enough, but it is, if you can, find the thing that lights your fire, and follow that into the way you commit your time and your energy, and the energy that you put out into the world, into the work that you do. That is an incredibly powerful, recipe for success. I know that because I spent 10 years in fast fashion and then left to start Etu, and it was the best move I ever made. So I'm happy to talk to anyone off.
And it helps your storytelling process too.
Absolutely.
So storytelling is a really important part of a brand identity, and also if you want to get, just really honest about it, storytelling is a way to really draw in consumers and to create a relationship and also to drive sales. And if that story is something that's connected to your values, then you're far more passionate about telling that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right, so now we're going to shift into supply chain and transparency. Two ideas that don't often, we don't often get to see the transparency that we, so desperately want. So, Kieran, how has technology been used in the food and farming industry to create transparent supply chains?
I think from the turn of the 21st century, a lot of the responsibility for generating transparency and understanding about our food supply chains came from chefs and from members of culinary industries. You think back to sort of No Reservations with Anthony Bourdain, which has a lineage back to like Julia Child in the 60s, who brought French cuisine to the world, and at that point the world was essentially America. For a long time, it has been chefs that have raised that profile, and even with the advent of streaming services, there's still shows like Chef Show, which is Jon Favreau and Roy Choi talking about cooking food, or Chef's Table, which are, again, sort of adjacent to agricultural industries and exploring them to an extent. But as different technologies around social media continue to develop, I think this is where we're starting to see farmers having their day in the sunshine. And it makes it so much easier, again, to tell a story about where a product has come from. People can communicate directly with their client base. They can sell via Instagram. They can sell via online platforms such as Open Food Network, which you punch in your address and it literally shows you where the local producers are in your area. You can communicate directly with those farmers. They organise the drop-off point, and you can, with a bit of homework, you can achieve everything that you need out of your weekly diet simply by searching on that platform. So if you don't know about Open Food Network, I think it's a good thing to explore, because for me, conducting my research with first-generation farmers, I spoke to 30 farms around Victoria, from Daylesford to Castlemaine, out to Gippsland, down the Mornington Peninsula. And even as someone who works in agriculture, I was absolutely blown away by the density of farms in the Greater Melbourne area. And so for people who are unfamiliar with those industries, or perhaps are yet to sort of embark upon that journey, I really recommend to just go do a bit of a Google search and have your mind blown at how easy it is to get food right around the corner from someone that you know actually produced it. And I guess technology is a funny one. I work on a market garden also just out of Kilmore called Remy's Patch, with a farmer named Remy Durand. And one day I was out in the field, it was about 2:30 in the afternoon. It had been a terrible day, just pummeling rain. And when you work for a market garden, it doesn't matter what the weather is, because if the veggies aren't on the table, then the farmer doesn't make any money. So, we nobly copped it from the elements. But I was picking turnips, and this is a 20-metre bed, extremely densely planted, of white Japanese salad turnips. And there was this one purple-topped turnip in the middle of the bed. And I sort of giggled to myself and just thought, screw it, I'm going to put this in and someone's going to buy it at the market and go, there's a purple turnip in here, this is mad. Obviously, we have too much time to think when we're picking veggies. But so we picked the order, we sent it off to the Melbourne Food Hub, who work with a range of different growers in this area and distribute through Greater Melbourne and work on a bunch of other sort of food systems projects. And a post came up on Instagram, and they were, funnily enough, as blown away as I was at this single purple turnip, and they started to tell the story of this one purple turnip that came from this farm north of Melbourne. It was going to end up on the plate of one of their lucky veggie box consumers. And for me, it was this absolute spin out to have played this ridiculously small part in the journey of a single vegetable that for some reason became so interesting through social media that a really well-regarded food systems organisation's comms person thought it was appropriate to share the story of this one purple turnip. And I just don't think 5-10 years ago that would have happened. I don't think people would have been as interested, the infrastructure wouldn't have been there, and the appetite, excuse the pun again, wouldn't have existed for that type of media content. So I think social media is so just like designed for farmers. I think the next 5 years, our industry is going to get very, very good at utilising that platform.
Keep an eye out for more purple turnips is what I'm hearing. Cool. And so Tara, switching that, from food and farming into fashion and textiles, how is technology currently being harnessed to improve traceability and visibility in the space of supply chain?
Yeah, so a lot of the existing and emerging technology in the fashion industry for larger corporations is very similar to that used by the food industry. So a lot of it is supply chain management oriented, and for example, QR codes, so you can track the supplier performance and delivery of materials and everything. But that is now being adopted and developed by companies such as ScanTrust, and we're seeing it more at the retail point for creating that visibility and transparency for consumers, which is obviously really important. But it also then incentivizes the retailer to have better practices that they don't want to hide, that they want to be visible. And I guess it's interesting because, we've all been using QR codes during the pandemic when we go out and eat at a restaurant, etc. And I think sometimes retailers have the habit of adopting these technologies and kind of fetishizing them, which is, problematic. So I think it depends on how the consumers are engaging with that technology, whether it becomes overwhelming, the amount of facts and information that they're getting, or whether we can really have kind of clear ratings of carbon dioxide emissions and carbon footprint. So there's a lot of development as well in blockchain technology that's kind of creating accuracy around those measurements and ratings. So all of the components, supply chains that go into making a garment. But as Kate said, it's so important that brand identity is about sharing stories of where things have come from, who has made the product, where it was made. I think at the Social Studio, we just love sharing the everyday of like what's happening in our studio, and people really respond to that and are really interested in that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It does sort of feel like currently it's optional to tell. It seems to be optional to participate in the space of transparency and accountability. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier on, Kate, about regulation. In that, how do we see more brands and retailers, giving their consumers that accountability, because this whole opt-in, do it if it suits. I mean, that's not the acceleration we need. We need faster change. So that's a little bit of an off-the-cuff question, but I'm interested to know, how we can be making that accountability happen faster.
It's such a good question, Rach. I think I've actually got a really nice story to answer it with. It's really quick. But somebody who I used to work with was, in his previous life, was a creative director for a big company overseas. And as a creative director, I'd fly in, fly out, just design a collection and then walk away. There was no communication with basically anyone below his kind of position in that company. And then one day, he was telling me this story, and he said one day the head of retail sent a message to someone who sent a message to someone and said, "You have to keep designing that dress with the bow on the front." And he was like, "I'm not designing that dress anymore. It's ridiculous. We've done it for 4 seasons. I'm not going to keep churning out this dress." And he was like, "Well, we've got 4 major stores in these major cities. Consumers all want them. You need to design this dress. Otherwise, we're going to have people who are unsatisfied and people who spend a lot of money in our stores." And he said, fine. Reluctantly, he designed the dress. And the reason why he was telling me this story was because he then went on to start a completely different company that was solely based on being transparent, because he realised in that moment that the consumer had an incredible amount of power. And I know a lot of us have heard you vote with your dollar, but you honestly do vote with your dollar. So when we're talking about transparency in supply chain, and it's an opt-in policy that you said, Rach, it's like, well, how much demand is there actually for us to have this information really readily available from the places we shop commonly at? And I think that what that story has done, it was told to me so long ago, has stuck in my head, that one question that you asked and you potentially think is insignificant is incredibly significant. And the amount of you that ask those questions on a regular basis end up going to that person, to that person, to that person, to the creative director who flies in and flies out and is told what to do because of money. And if money, your money, is demanding that you want to know not only what the product is made from, but who it was made by and what percentage of it was made in what country, then that will happen. It's just about asking. And you don't have to be, overly aggressive about it. There's lots of ways you can go about it. But yeah, I love that story because it showed me that it was possible at a time where I was like, well, what am I going to do to make it change? I was like, wow, money.
Yeah, and also just a reminder that we each have that power. We're making decisions every day. We're, making purchasing decisions all the time, and, how can we stop and really think about the decisions that we make. Courtney, I'm interested to know, on your website you talk a little bit about lifting the lid of the secretive business practices that take place in the fashion and textile industry. Why have fashion consumers been removed, from the origin story, which is something we touched on a little bit earlier? And because, it's an intrinsic part of the product process. And so I'm interested to know, with regards to those secretive business practices and the removal of consumers from that origin story. Like, we understand that businesses are obviously benefiting from that removal. What are the barriers for retailers sort of, practicing authentic transparency with their consumers?
It's quite complicated, I think. I think just when we started not making our own clothes and having someone else make clothes for us, so, people used to, or their mums would make their clothes, or their grandparents would make their clothes. My grandma knitted us all of our sweaters when we were babies, and my mum made clothes for us when we were little, but like I'm not even the right example, like thinking back a long time ago. And I guess as that got more and more removed from the consumer, the less they thought about it, like because they didn't know what went into it. Making a garment is a complicated task, and many hands go into that making of, from the fabrics to the trims to the actual constructing of the piece. Like it's a huge ordeal. And I think maybe we've just gotten so used to things being so readily available that we've forgotten to even think about it, or we never thought about it because we just grew up like that. But I think you know, on the flip side of that, like marketing is not, it's not like, oh, look at this wonderful origin story. It's like, look how great your life will be if you buy this new outfit, and how much better you'll feel if you look like your friends in the latest top or whatever, and here it is for $5. Like, I think marketing is really like pitching this like lifestyle that we all see, and we can't help but kind of feel like affected by, because that's what it's been shoved down our throats since forever. And so I think that like shifting marketing is like a key part of that. And also that comes from consumers asking for it and being interested in it, absolutely, but it also comes from the people sending the messages. So it's a very kind of tangled sort of issue, but I think what we try to do at ABCH is to really talk about those things, and it is a complicated story. The supply chain is so complicated, and we talk about like one thing. We'll talk about the fabric or the buttons. Like, we'll try to focus on one thing and talk about the whole origin story of that piece. And people are like blown away. They're just like, I didn't know that was the story of how linen was grown, or whatever it might be. So I think people are interested. It's just that there needs to be like those two things come together, the interest from people and then the brands or the businesses actually opening up the books, so to speak, and showing what that story is. But I will say on that issue of transparency and like opt-in, it's like some people are like hijacking transparency as well. They're like, oh, look how transparent we are. We're going to tell you how much it cost for us to make this garment so that you know you're getting a great price. But they don't talk about you know, where the cotton was grown, or if, you know, they had any sort of policies around labor in the picking of the cotton, or whatever it might be. Like, you could pick any part of the supply chain and be like, well, what about that? And transparency is very like suited to the marketer and suited to the brand. Oh, we'll just show the good stuff. So I'm quite aware, being a fashion brand, it's very hard to nail everything and be perfect at everything. It's almost impossible. But if you're kind of honest about that stuff and you're just like, hey, like, look, we're still looking for a solution for our labels. We have not found a solution that we're happy with. We're using this now, and we're telling you about it because it holds us accountable. And I think that is so important to like our brand DNA at ABCH, that we keep doing that, because as you grow, it can be easy just to like keep things back and not tell the whole story. But if you tell the whole story, then people know there's more to ask of other people, and it kind of lifts the bar for everyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Did you want to add something to that, Kate? You're right. We've got 10 minutes to go of the talk, and I'm really keen to be able to swing to the audience for questions. So have a think if anyone would like to ask anything to our speakers, but obviously they'll be sticking around after, so you know, no pressure. The final chapter of this story was really talking about waste management and sort of the shift towards circular economy. I think I'm going to I'm just going to ask a couple of speakers to speak really quickly to this, because, you know, the word sustainability itself has been muddied over the years. You know, it's a really big umbrella term, and, you know, what does it mean? It's almost lost its meaning in some regard. And, you know, I personally think circular economy, we're heading in the same direction there as it's loosely used. I guess, Kate, I'm interested to hear from you, your thoughts around the importance of language, because we're starting to see a really exciting shift where Australian onshore companies are exploring and expanding in textile waste reduction. Apparel is one of them that comes to mind. But, we're starting to see, they've got a really big audience. We're starting to see words like circular economy get branded round. What are the risks of throwing language like that around without maybe, I guess just how can we avoid circular economy becoming the same phrase as sustainability?
I think that's an excellent question to end on. Honestly, I think the question around language and the way we use language it's so important, because language has the ability to include, it has the ability to engage, it has the ability to empower, and using language concisely and simply is a brand's greatest asset. And I think sometimes when we get involved or maybe preoccupied with thinking about terms like, okay, are we eco? Are we green? Are we sustainable? Are we circular? We get a bit off track. And I think I like to think about it this way, is that if you're championing a certain term within your copy on your website or through your business, and you're saying, oh, we're circular economy, blah, 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 you're creating one hurdle for your consumer to overcome in order to get to know you. Not everybody knows what circular economy is. Not everybody knows what these terms that a lot of us may be familiar with mean. And so if I want to get to know you, I'm already feeling a tiny bit excluded, because I'm already like, I know I want to do better, or I know I'm interested in recycling, or I know I'm interested in this brand in general, they seem really cool, but I've got to research this phrase, or I've got to know better in order to feel okay or feel empowered about making my choice to support this company. So I think that language in that respect also has the ability to alienate, to exclude, and to discourage people to get involved. So as a company, I think, and as an educator and as a student, it's really, really important to be simple, to be honest, and to be clear when you use your language. And again, harking back to values, but potentially look at the phrase or the term or the different aspect of whatever the word is that you want to use to describe your company. Look at it, break it apart with your team, and use that activity as a way to create simpler words, create words that associate or align with your values, and use those words. Help make it easier for people to get on board. And I think that, that's a way that language can be used to unite and to make us all feel like we can take part in this conversation. Because I think a lot of the time when we're encouraged to maybe think about what a company is not doing instead of the little bits and pieces that they are doing right, we can get bogged down in that obsession with we are responsible for X, Y, and Z. But I think, we need to celebrate the success that's happening and be really honest and transparent in our use of language so that people feel involved, welcomed, and invited.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm just going to sneak one more question in. And Tara, it's for you. I do believe Australia has a really exciting opportunity with regards to onshore textile recycling. We currently ship a lot of our textile recycling overseas to India, China. And one thing that COVID-19, I think, allowed us to see was the importance of resilience. So as, we get put in our 5K bubbles, borders close, other countries start rejecting our waste, we need place-based solutions that can help us, the industry, build resilience in the future. I'm interested, Tara, to I guess hear your thoughts on where you would like to see the industry go in Australia with regards to opportunities around textile recycling.
Yeah, sure. So recycling's a really exciting new emerging industry within Australia. Like you said, unfortunately, the infrastructure doesn't exist for the moment, despite the fact that these new companies are working really hard to find solutions to the whole process being here onshore. At the moment, apparel, they outsource and ship the clothing off to India to be recycled. And just going back to what Kate was saying before about language, often circular economy is used hand in hand with recycling by some of these companies, and it's a little bit misleading because circular economy really means reducing waste in production and the supply chain, reducing pollution. And then also, as a consumer, we need to be thinking about mending our clothes, reusing them, upcycling them, making sure we get the maximum wear out of them before we're then donating them for recycling. So I just hope that these new emerging companies, you've also got BlockTex that have some really interesting technology around separating the fibers, which is really problematic in the industry. So separating cottons, polyesters is a really tricky business. But hopefully those companies can be sharing innovation and then also working closely with government, council, and retailers to really drive the infrastructure that's needed, and also to make space for smaller startups that are interested in getting in the area as well, so that it's not just dominated by a few large corporations who are kind of then driving the message that more people can take opportunity in this exciting new space. Yeah.
That was beautiful. Yeah, creating more inclusive space, absolutely. We could certainly talk about this conversation, I think, for hours and hours. Unfortunately, we don't have that time. I did want to invite audience engagement. If anyone had a question they would like to ask one of our panellists, please, you are most welcome. But if not, never mind, we will continue on with a few other questions. But is there anyone out there that's, yeah?
I'm just wondering if you guys, I guess if each speaker could maybe, thanks. Hello? Oh, hello.
Hello.
I'm kind of just wondering if maybe each of you could share like one thing the people in the audience could do, like walk away with, and were you about to answer that question?
Oh my gosh, that is our final question, but let's go there, yeah.
Yeah, just in your specific areas of expertise, like what can I do today when I go home that could actually, have a bit of a snowball effect or just be the beginning of something?
Beautiful.
The beginning of my farming journey started with food waste management. It was keeping me up at night how much organic material I was putting into a rubbish bin. And so Katie and I started composting, started worm farms, and then growing our own food. And we were terrible at growing food initially, and thankfully over the last few years we've got better. But worms, a worm farm, if you have any guilt when you go to sleep at night about putting food scraps into the bin, get a worm farm, a $20 one from Bunnings to start off with if you want. We picked a bathtub off the footpath in Brighton and built a frame around it. But worm farms are just their ability to process organic material and to give you a return on that through fertilising agents like worm castings is absolutely mind-blowing. It's pretty economical with regards to space. Further to that, I just think open food network and farmers markets. If we are serious about the pluralisation of our agricultural industries, then as Katie said, we vote with our dollar. And there are so many people, particularly in Melbourne, like there are people growing food in rental properties, in the backyards. There's Ceres, there's Collingwood Children's Farm. There are small market gardens everywhere in Melbourne. And if we're serious about food systems change, then the solutions are often literally over our back fence.
Can I just ask something about food and farming?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
wait, we can.
There is a mic for the recording.
Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks for the chat. It's very good. Just asking about farming and industrial animal farming, because a lot of what you speak of sounds lovely, and I think for most of us living in affluent suburbs in affluent Australia, it's all good. But given 95% of animals are factory farmed in Australia, what would you say to the people that don't live in the sort of suburbs that we live in? Regenerative farming is not going to solve the world's issues, obviously, when it comes to animal farming. And I am vegan, so I just want to say that.
It could solve a lot of issues, not in terms of the ethical treatment of animals. I think if you live in sort of peri-urban or even regional or rural Australia, you're far more likely to be able to put in a bit of research to find meat producers who, you talk about the sort of the convoluted nature of labelling and all that type of stuff. Yep. The difference between, cage-free, free range, beyond free range, all of these terms, they do take a bit of homework, but strictly with meat production, as you highlighted, that's not my area of expertise, but there are easily farms that produce chickens for meat or beef.
Oh no, for sure. I guess I'm just highlighting that it was a scary stat when I learned, and it wasn't just one article. I've read lots about this, that 95% of the meat is coming from factory farms. So I guess it's just, the regenerative farming, I think the stat is we'd need like 275% more land if meat consumption continued in the manner that it is continuing.
And I don't think it will continue in the manner that it's already not, on the same trajectory historically as it has been. It's on a bit of a downward trajectory, meat consumption. And research into even lab-grown proteins, I think, is incredibly valuable in that space. And I think as soon as it's cheap enough and it tastes like meat, then there'll be less barriers to people taking that up. But I think maybe some research about the big cattle stations in the Northern Territory would be interesting for you to see just how they're using huge herds, thousands of head of cattle to regenerate those landscapes. But once you get into the issue of ethics, you're sort of out of a horticultural or agricultural industry perspective, and you're sort of getting more into a bit of a world of social action. And there it's that we need activism, we need lobbying of different levels of governments to be able to improve and increase the regulation around the treatment of animals in those production systems, but also around the marketing issues that we see in terms of what constitutes a normal Australian diet. And I know growing up in Frankston, we ate meat every day. And when I told my parents that I didn't want to eat that meat anymore, it was mind-blowing to them. Yeah. And that's a responsibility I think that we all carry on our shoulders.
Yep, agreed. I'll hand the mic back. But just one good thing to listen to is Nicholas Carter, who isn't just on the social aspect, he's an environmental scientist, and he does talk about the whole regenerative farming and sort of debunks a lot of the ideas behind it. So I think there's, I have been listening to a lot of things and reading a lot of things, and I think there's interesting marketing going on both sides, I guess, that we all have to be mindful of.
Absolutely. I think it is good to be aware of marketing. I mean, some people say marketing can quite easily slip into propaganda, and, it is something, an awareness I think we all need to practice when it comes to consuming messaging, and I guess thank you for sharing that resource and for that question. But it is about reading broadly and consuming multiple perspectives. I just want to swing back to that first question because I know it was for each of the panelists to share. So, Courtney, what is a takeaway for the audience for them to be able to consider when they leave this talk about, changing behaviour?
Yeah, sure. It's hard to pick one, but then I just was thinking about it, and I think if you can think of a garment, I'm taking a fashion perspective obviously here, if you can think of a garment in terms of birth, so how it was made, life, how it lives and how you wear it and look after it and mend it and wash it, etc., and then afterlife, what's going to happen to it when you no longer want it or no longer like it or whatever the reason is, it falls apart, whatever. Those three things, and kind of use them to almost guide your purchasing decisions, as well as, help you kind of maybe not buy something. Maybe you have something in your wardrobe that you just need to mend the hole, or you just need to give it a little refresh, or you can take it to a tailor and get it, taken in or let out, whatever that might be. I think if you can kind of think of those three things, I know it might seem overwhelming, but just think of it simply like, how was this made, how will it live, and how will it end?
Beautiful, thank you. And I know we're a little over time. We want two more answers, thank you. But Tara, what would your takeaway for the audience be?
Yeah, so I agree with Courtney. I think, first of all, think about the garments you already have in your wardrobe and how you might mend them and reuse them. But if you're going to buy something from a retail store, I think, engage particularly with local designers and really ask those questions that maybe you feel like they haven't answered. Be curious because, yes, there's a lot of kind of selective transparency going on. And I think also like a lot of local designers, having worked for a few in Melbourne, they really want to engage in that discussion, particularly with their customer as well. So I think it's a really important way to engage with the product. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I reiterate what everyone said.
Surely you want to add a few.
I agree. I think it was all said beautifully. It's like research, vote with your dollar, be curious, and get to know what you've got already.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to our wonderful panellists for sharing such a broad range of insights with us all today. I mean, it was a meaty topic. Nodding, yeah. Okay, sure. But, I hope that today's conversation has maybe planted a seed or that you were leaving with the learning that you didn't have originally, because it is about perspective and it is about hearing from a broad range of experts. So just to finish off, a big thanks to the panellists for your time and contributing your insights today. To M Pavilion for creating the spaces for such important conversations. Their program's incredible. I'd highly recommend you all go and explore it because it's on until April. And finally, Ulla, thank you so much also for helping put on this wonderful show. Really appreciate all your help with that. So thanks everybody for your time today, coming down on your Sunday. Remember, we've got some beautiful soil, so feel free to touch it. Feel free to, smell it, whatever you want to do there. We've also got the flowers and the bunches of kale generously gifted from Ecofloria. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Rach.
Thanks.